I think when you think about the infinite possibilities we have in our life, most people think of limitations. Like they think we're supposed to grow old, get some kind of chronic disease, and then we expire. No, I think that we can actually be healthy up to the day that we leave.
Welcome to Ending Chronic Disease, where we challenge everything you thought you knew about health. Join international best-selling author and wellness pioneer, Dr. Fabrizio Mancini, as he reveals how to transform your body, your mind, and your life starting today.
Hi, this is Dr. Fab Mancini. I'm so excited today because we're going to be talking about probably the one thing that most people are wondering, and that is your mindset. The mindset has become really a big topic today, but most people don't realize where does it come from, what is it, and it's always associated with the brain in some way. So I have today one of the world leaders in brain function, some people call it brain fitness, somebody that has spent over the last 30 plus years researching and evaluating the function of the brain, especially our thoughts and our belief systems. Somebody that has probably the most innovative technology in how to empower your mindset and your brain, called BrainTap, which is one thing that I use every single day. And my kids say it's the best gift I've ever given them. Somebody that truly has a mission for reducing mental health in the world, Dr. Patrick Porter. Patrick, it's so great to see you once again.
Hey, Dr. Fab, thanks for having me. It's great, always great to talk to you.
Well, you know, I'm super excited because you and I get to have these conversations. And as you know, many times I say to you, I wish we were recording it. You know, there were so many things that always come up. Well, guess what? Today we are recording it. And I want to start by really framing how big this is. Recent science has said that of all of our thousands of thoughts that we have every single day, 90% of those thoughts are the same thoughts we had the day before, and 80% of those thoughts on average are negative in nature. So now I want to explore your 30 plus years of experience, science background, having clinics, helping millions of people around the world. Why is it that our thoughts are so critical in the life that we're currently living?
Well, it's really genetics. Really, we're the recipients of our ancestors, and they were paranoid, right? they survived. They didn't fall off the cliff. They didn't get eaten by the tiger. You know, they made it. And this genetic lineage they now know is part of our DNA structure. This 80 billion miles of DNA that is actually crystalline in substances throughout our body, and it's interpreting our environment, right? I mean, when they say now that they mapped the human genome, we all know they didn't. They mapped 1% of it. But in 2018, they said, hey, for every 40 seconds, we change based on our environment. And the one thing that most people never change is their thoughts, right? Because they think that they can't control their thoughts. The reality is that, even go back to Maxwell Maltz and psychocybernetics and things like that. He would do these surgeries on people, make them beautiful, but they would still see an ugly person in the mirror. And because our thoughts drive that interpretation, and Bruce Lipton, which we both know is a friend of both of ours, and Bruce says that 3,200 gene expressions change by our thoughts. So, in the one study that I like to quote all the time is they did a study where they actually measured our mitochondrial health. So when people tell me we have a mental health problem in the world today, I say we have a physiological problem more than a psychological problem. Because imagine you want to drive from Florida to New York, but you have no gas in the tank. You can say all the affirmations you want. You can pound the table. You can do whatever. But until you put gas in the tank, you can't make that change. So we need our physiology upgraded. And so when we think about what we think about, really, our words, like you're talking about, 80% are negative. And that's not a bad thing because that's just our genetic heritage. We used to have to survive, right? On the scale of how long we've been humans, we haven't really had the luxuries like we have today. In your pocket today, you can listen to the Phoenix Symphony. You can take a trip to Egypt. You can do all those things just by picking out your cell phone. Nobody could do that in the history of time. This is a beautiful time. But the problem is people aren't choosing the right thoughts. So what they showed in this study that I want to just kind of emphasize here is that when you have a positive thought, when you're thinking positive, you're actually generating more mitochondrial energy. This is what they proved. So, I mean, when you think about, there's a connection between our thoughts and our things, right? And we all know this because, you know, we both are with Louise Hay's group, the Hay House, and she probably brought it to the forefront about our affirmations things. But if you can start changing those negative thoughts, even just one at a time, and just because you have a thought doesn't mean you have to take an action. You know, when they say that thoughts are ancestors to action, right? So when we think about our thoughts, we have to change at the source. And if we can generate 200 times more energy by thinking positively, when you think about ending chronic disease, one of the biggest things we need to do is we need energy at the equation, right? The energy has to increase. So it's not just about thinking that way. We have to do something about it. We have to take the right supplementation. We have to move. We have to breathe, you know, and most people don't know how to breathe. You know, when you think about it, I mean, it gets right down to the basic nature of what's going on with the physiology and the psychology of a person. When you are in a state of constant low-level stress, in fear, and your body just can't operate. So part of our mission is to teach people, you know, in the past, we used to have periods of downtime, right? You and I both remember when we used to leave the office and we didn't have to talk to anybody till the next morning. We get on our answering machine and see who called us. Now we have this digital trail that follows us everywhere, and we're constantly on. So there's no time to disassociate and relax. And I think people need to learn how to disassociate and relax, but in a healthy way. You know, people are disassociating and relaxing, but they're using substances that are causing physiological problems. You know, and I'll just use alcohol as an example. I mean, I'm not against people drinking alcohol, but when you have more than 2 drinks, that's an assault on your physiology. And you could be the greatest athlete in the world. You give them 2 drinks and they're no longer the greatest athlete in the world. So that tells me that nobody can really handle alcohol. But if you're going to do it, you need to know what the consequences are and do it with your meal and have plenty of fat, fiber, and protein. So it's all about realizing that you're in control here. And the brain loves certainty as well. And right now we live in uncertain times. So but you can create certainty within your own thoughts. You can take the time in the morning to reboot your brain and say, hey, today is my best day. Today, you know, I get to talk to Dr. Fab. Wow, this is a great day. You know, or I get to listen to this podcast. And I always tell people, think in terms of this moment in time, right here, right now, this very moment is your moment. Because if you start to live your life that every day is a special day, I mean, there are people that don't have the same things you have. Some people can't watch this podcast because they don't even know it exists, but you're on here right now listening. So what can you learn from that? And when I sit in a conference, whether I'm going to your conference or one of the other conferences we go to, I'm always listening to the speaker and saying, what one thing can I take away? Because in neurophysiology, they showed that if you can get one new thought into the brain, your whole brain has to rewire around that one new thought. So imagine today while we're talking, hopefully the listeners will get one new thought, their whole brain will rewire, and their trajectory, where they're going, will change because now there's possibility. And I think when you think about the infinite possibilities we have in our life, most people think of limitations. Like they think we're supposed to grow old, get some kind of chronic disease, and then we expire. No, I think that we can actually be healthy up to the day that we leave. You know, it doesn't have to be this long, drawn-out process where somebody's taking care of us. We don't remember our family and friends. You know, these bodies were designed for longevity, really, but our lifestyles are what's killing us, really. So I'm sure you're going to share that with people. You know, it's our lifestyles. And it starts with our thoughts, because your perception is reality. You know, so
let's talk a little bit about something that I know is close to your heart, and you'll be helping some of the biggest companies and corporations out there be able to get more out of their employees. You know, a recent study showed that over 70% of the workforce, our employees, are disengaged. Most of them don't even like or are comfortable where they are working. Tell me a little bit about what is it that we need to understand, whether I'm an employee or whether I am a CEO of a major corporation right now that have thousands of employees, and I'm paying them even though I recognize that the majority of them are disengaged. Tell me what we need to understand about what's going on in that, because it concerns me about lack of productivity. Many a times as the absenteeism, whether they're home because they don't want to be there, or whether they're at work but they're not really there mentally. What have you found, and how are you helping these companies?
Yeah, Well, I'll talk about a study we did. It's actually Julia Hart who helped us with the study. She's an ex-Googler, and she burned out. People burn out, right? And so she goes out into companies and she helps people with burnout. And she asked me, she said, what can you do to help people with burnout? I said, well, at 2:00 in the afternoon, they can do a reboot, because this is normal. When we wake up in the morning, we have this high cortisol, in dopamine, in neopinephrine, all this, our brain is ready to go, right, in the morning. But then by about 2:00 in the afternoon, we now know physiologically that we drop in temperature 2 degrees. Our body needs a reboot. It's not just a siesta that they do in the movies. We all need to take some kind of siesta. So what we did is I said, give me 20 minutes in the afternoon. Of course, these were Googlers who were programmers. And most people don't realize that at Google and Microsoft, they measure or they keep track of every keystroke. So when those people, imagine a job where every day you're measured by how many times you hit the keys. I mean, this is a slave kind of business, right? But they're getting paid for it. I mean, it's not like they're doing it for free, but in some people do it for free because they find enjoyment in it. But these are people, they didn't want their top people to burn out. So at first they said, no way I can give you 20 minutes. I said, you give me 20 minutes for 2 weeks and I guarantee you will never not give me 20 minutes. And what we found out was, and they can watch the video. She did a TED talk on it now. But then what we found out was after doing that 20-minute break, they actually got 26% more work done. Now that's good for the employer, right? But for them personally, we didn't do anything about their sleep, but their sleep improved 47%. There's a saying that children that are rested well sleep well. Well, most adults aren't rested well. They don't have the energy to sleep. So when you reboot the system, and what our brain needs more than anything else is ATP. And it takes about 4 hours to 6 hours to take the food you're consuming and make ATP, because the body has to metabolize, digest, and use it. But with light therapy, it goes directly into the brain. The mitochondria absorbs that light energy, spins up the what they call the Krebs cycle. And people like Brecca are talking online now. They're saying that there's studies that show 32% more ATP is produced through red light therapy. So we use that in the ears, and we're using blue light therapy in the eyes because we're trying to tune the brain. But the one thing that changed for them was their happiness score improved 54%. So when you think about and there's a whole bunch of other things that happen just by taking a 20-minute break. Everything we know is true about taking a nap, we can supercharge in 10 to 20 minutes using technology, because we have a technology problem out there today. Nobody's going to get rid of their cell phones, their big screen TVs, their Tesla vehicles, whatever they have. These are all things that are conveniences for us, so we're not going to get rid of them. So we need a technology solution that could be scaled and taken across the world. And that's where, I've always looked, when I started this company, actually in 2012, it was after you doing years with my franchise company, and we were working with addiction. And most people don't realize that addiction isn't caused by, when people get addicted, a lot of workforce people are trying to find out, how can I get my employees to stop being addicted? What they really want is balance. And there's a really good book by John Marshall called Finding Your Perfect High. And what he's talking about is the right left brain. When we get into the workspace, we get so left-brained. And, when you're doing your taxes, unless you're someone like my sister, who I measure with our neurocheck, and she actually got more energy doing taxes, which to me, I'm passing out after doing taxes. It's too much for my left brain to handle. But some people find that enjoyable. But most people, when you're doing a left brain function, you're using energy. But when you're doing something right brain, like think about the things you enjoy doing. When you first went to work, there's an excitement about that. There's a newness. Our brain likes to learn and discover. These novel things create what's called neuroplasticity. But then we start doing the same thing every day. We get the same results every day. The brain starts to go, well, what's new and different? Because that's not the way we evolved, right? It was always different. We never knew what was going to happen. We were hunting and gathering. So I think in the workplace, more than anything else, instead of coffee breaks, which were good when we were doing manual labor, we needed to use biology to upgrade and to have a cup of coffee, which is fine, but it's not going to help the brain. In fact, coffee, it might give you a sense of excitement and a sense of clarity, but it's short-lived. When you have this powerful brain that is the most powerful pharmacy on earth that we can activate with as little as 10 minutes, you can get your brain back. I think that what we're going to find in the workplace, and what our plan is to show people that let's have brain breaks at work now instead of coffee breaks. I mean, you can have your coffee after you do your brain break, but the The thing is that we need to reboot. Just like the old computers, think of like the old Microsoft computer. The fix was always just reboot it, because your innate system, we have this innate intelligence, which I know you're an expert at. We have this innate intelligence in our body, and it's not just our spine, it's our whole body. Every cell knows what to do. But if think of stress like dirty leaves or wet leaves on a fire, and they're covering up our mitochondria. That mitochondria is still burning in there, but it can't broadcast its light energy and information, because it's actually sending codes to our body to either upregulate our DNA or downregulate our DNA. So if we can clear that away, because we lift that stress, even if it's just for 10 minutes, the body will reset. Now you have all this resource to go. In the number one thing about the study that I was talking about earlier was they showed that people that looked at life as a challenge rather than a threat actually produced 200 times more energy at the mitochondrial level. That's pretty significant. We have a study going on now with a company called MeScreen, where we're doing a pilot study to show, because we show it with the NeuroCheck, but this is actually a scientifically validated study that shows how light energy actually improves mitochondrial function. We're learning so much about the body that it's not just this biological thing that takes off, but you're actually controlling how it does it. Now, there's certain things that are on default, right? I mean, it's kind of like going down the highway. We can use GPS to get where we're going, but once we know shortcuts, we can take those shortcuts. And of course, most people call those biohacks or health optimization choices. And that's why we have supplementation and exercise and things of that nature.
Well, another thing that I wanted to get your input in is my concern about our youth. You have children, you have grandchildren, and we see that some of the statistics on depression, anxiety, suicide have escalated to numbers that we've never seen in the history of humanity. Tell me a little bit, as if there's a parent that is listening right now that is concerned about the mental health of their children, what are some of the things that you would recommend for them to engage in order to understand a little bit better? How do I help them? How do I help my grandchild? How do I help my children when I see them struggling right now, and I may not be aware what I can do?
Right. Well, the brain loves patterns, so we have to break some of their patterns, right? One of the things that when my grandchildren were younger, I would always tell my son, I don't want them to watch television before I pick them up. Because if you've ever noticed, and a parent will, if you notice how engaging your children are, then you turn on the television. That television is functioning at alpha, which is the neutral to the brain, but it's sending us signals that are in high beta. So our brain is getting confusing messages. So what's happening is it causes an agitation in the nervous system, and kids act differently. So first thing I would do is no television before school. You need to do something like a meditation, a breathing technique, BrainTap, something we call it brain prep in schools, and to get the brain ready. And just like an adult thinks they need coffee, what they really need is the brainwave called SMR, sensory motor rhythm, to get their brain engaged. So, and I'm not against stress, like playing a computer game. People think that's fun, but a lot of these, especially these single shooter games and all these things, the brain doesn't know the difference between real or imagined. And you're not going to stop your kids from playing those. I'm not saying that. But what we do is actually, one of the plans I have is to build a device that will actually measure HRV while they're playing these games. And when their HRV goes down below a certain number, the game shuts off until they do a brain tap to boot them back up again, because it's not about the stress. You can handle that stress, but the problem is they go from that stress to another stress to another stress. And even though they're kids and we think, oh, they're resilient or whatever, these kids are being assaulted every day. And schools aren't like they were when I went to school. When I went to school, we had recess, we had fun times. Now everything in school seems to be about, let's get them to pass this test. So it's not about creativity. Get your kids involved with doing creative things. I mean, we send our grandkids get a kit every month where they have to build a laboratory kit, because we need thinkers in the world today. A lot of people, they think the left brain, most schools just grade people on their left brain knowledge. But in life, the left brain doesn't solve the problem. There's a saying actually in Alcohol Anonymous, it says knowledge isn't a cure, right? So knowledge doesn't make you smarter. In fact, most people don't understand how the brain works. When we were born, we were fully wired, and it has to do with brain voltage. when we were born, we had 18.1 volts. So imagine a light bulb, 18.1 volts. But then when we were about 27 years old, the average brain is 10.1. So we lost half the voltage. When you think, how did we learn a language? How did we learn to walk? How did we learn our environment? How did we learn all this? It's because we were fully wired. Now, as we learn things, our brain unwires. It's totally different than what you think. So the reality is the smarter you become, really the dumber you are, unless you use your right brain and continue to do creative thinking and do like meditation, breathing techniques, and look outside of your known universe. Because if you get locked into your known universe, the brain will continue to unwire until it has no wiring left. And they call this neuropruning in neurophysiology. So with kids, always look for things that you can do out in nature. We now know, science has proven it, Clint Oprah, who wrote the book Earthing, he kind of brought it to light, but we all knew this to be true. When you get outside, the earth is full of ions, and we are full of ions. We have positive and negative ions, and we're meant to exchange these ions with the earth. And since they came out with these shoes that are insulating us, I'm wearing shoes right now that are grounding shoes that actually Clint gave me. But on my computer right now, I'm sitting with a grounding mat under my keyboard because I know that my body works best if I'm exchanging these ions. And as bizarre as that sounds, the science proved that it diminishes inflammation by 25%. So when you think about chronic disease, they call it, inflammaging or something. There's a saying that the inflammation causes us to age faster. So we need to get rid of that. And the studies show that grounding reduces that by 25%. The other thing is we need light. William Cousins, actually 20 years ago said the most underprescribed nutrient on earth is light. So we have this thing out here called the sun. And I always tell people, think of the sun like the mitochondria of the universe, of our solar system, rather, not the universe, because we have other stars out there. But that sun is actually beaming critical data to our body. They call it the circadian rhythm. So if we can get outside, get a little sunshine, especially sunrises and sunsets, they've actually had studies show that the gut biome will repair itself. And these are things that a left brain, logical, linear person, because it wasn't taught in school. These are things that, they're not taught now they're being taught in the labs because when we were voted Researchers of the Year in India, it was because we showed with the NeuroCheck that these ancient traditions like sun gazing, breath work, yoga, breathing techniques, they're changing our physiology. And our kids today are sitting, right? And this would be the last part, but there's a lot of things you can do, but the kids need to get up and move and breathe. They say that 20 minutes of sitting is equivalent health-wise to smoking a cigarette. Now, it doesn't affect your lungs like a cigarette would, but the physiology is down-regulating. So when we're sitting, our brain goes into more of a state of a delta state. So when you think of this brainwave of delta, we need that brainwave, but not when we're awake. We need beta and alpha. These are reactionary minds and intuitive mind, and, the other brainwaves are there as well. But we find when we do studies, even with children today, which we never saw before, their brain is in delta most of the time, the prevailing brainwave. That means their body is tired. They need to rest. They need to recover. And of course, they can have sugar. And the average person, one thing that my parents did, my mother, first thing she did with us, we were all spasms, and could you imagine, we were brought up Catholic, so we went to the Catholic school, and we would always meet at church in the morning. Well, they always knew the porters were spasms. They'd put us in the cry room because we were unmanageable, right? But something happened. My mother went to a nutritionist who did something called iridology. And now we know nobody can handle dyes and sugars and things. But back in the 70s, we were like freaks, right? Nobody was doing that. But nutrition was how we got into this. So when you think about, she took sugar off the table. Now, you can't avoid sugar, and our body produces sugar. So most people don't realize it's not sugar in the form of white sugar like you get at a coffee table, but your body produces something. Every stressful event, your body pumps out equivalent to 25 grams of sugar. What's important about that is your bloodstream can only handle 1 tablespoon at a time. If it produces more than that, then the insulin drip starts. Insulin is a fat storage hormone. So when you think about our kids and how overweight they are, it's because they're not using the energy. And muscle is the key to regulating sugar, right? So they took out recesses in the school systems. That was probably the dumbest thing, because when you exercise, you create something called BDNF. BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factors, this is what creates neuroplasticity. So you're expecting the kid to learn without the materials. It's like telling him to write on a pad of paper, but you didn't give him a pen or a paper. You need to give it. So I think that they need to send their kid to school. We were all teased when we were growing up because we would bring our own lunches because school lunches are terrible. Now they even have the box stores are in the schools. Those are foods that are terrible. And we now know that seed oils are worse than sugar. So there's a lot of things they can do. And at first the kids are going to, we rebelled. I can tell you, when you're used to having sugar, you're just like any other addict, you're going to go crazy. But once I found out that I was smarter, I could focus better, I was better at sports, that became my mission. And I wrote about it in my first book, Awaken the Genius, because it seems so simple. There's a saying, spirit is simple, but man is complex. Everybody wants to make it about a pill. And just to put the listeners at ease, SSRIs were approved for 14 days of use. So if you've used them more than 14 days, they're not approved for that. Why are you doing it? They're meant for a short-term solution to a long-term problem. You can't have a pill without a skill, right? So we need to build the skills in our children, teaching them to meditate, teaching them to relax, teaching them to make good food choices. That's why we partnered with Dr. Oz in his nonprofit, because he actually teaches kids how to read food labels. He teaches them he got sodas out of schools. Probably the worst thing that a kid can drink is soda pop. We need to have mineralized water because we're not getting the minerals we need. We could go on that. We could do a whole 3 days on what to do for children. But I think they kind of get the idea is that, and this is when we have children today that are having chronic diseases at a young age, our body is so resilient, but we can't just feed it garbage and think that it's going to, this body is magical, but unless you're Saint Germain and you're an alchemist and you can turn junk food into health food, it's not going to happen. And, and if you're not exercising, you're not breathing right, you're not thinking right. And, we need to teach our kids to take what I would tell the schools when I would go. We used to have a program called Awaken the Genius in schools. And the whole thing was about teaching kids to be their own advocate. When my dad got help with alcoholism, he went back to school and he got a PhD and he thought he was a dumb kid, but he had two parents. My grandparents were both addicts. One was a nurse and she was addicted to pharmaceutical drugs. My grandfather was an alcoholic. And so my dad didn't have a chance, right? But when he got help from the Silva method, he went back to school. And one of the things that shocked him was in school, one of the teachers stood up in class and said, "No one gets an A in my class." And my dad, who was very assertive, he raised his hand and said, "Yes, can I help you?" He says, "Does that mean you can't teach an A?" And the teacher went, "What do you mean?" He goes, "If you can teach an A, I can get an A." Teachers under the misguided understanding that they're supposed to trick the students. Their job is to educate, inform, and then the test is to let them to validate it. So a lot of kids get crushed in school because of an egotistic teacher who doesn't understand their role. Their role is to educate, be a mentor, really. Some of my best mentors were my teachers, the ones that really cared about me, that shared with me, but they have to become their own advocate. And I'll just do one more example. When we did a study in Pikeville College with students, we took C students that didn't want to go to college. That was part of the requirement for the study. And we asked them one question: who asked questions in class? And every one of them in the study said, dumb kids ask questions. So we gave them each a piece of paper with every student in their class on it. And for a week, they had to check mark who asked questions. Guess who asked questions in class? All the smart kids. So what we told them was, you know what? That teacher is teaching to the highest level because the smart kids are asking the questions. When I teach this to kids, when I was working with them, when I had my practice, I said, your job is to ask 3 questions in every class that you're doing poorly in every day. Now, they didn't always do 3 questions, but when you have that inquisitive mind and they're asking questions, and I still remember the teachers coming back to Dr. Sanders, who was the one helping with the study. They said, these kids are taking over the class. And we said, well, how's it going? Well, they're doing much better. Yeah, they raised their grade point average 1 point in 4 weeks. And one of the biggest, we only spent 4 hours with them. One thing we taught them was to ask questions. So teach your kids to question everything. Don't believe anything until it works for you. And I think that you and I both know that out there in the world today, especially in health, you've got to question everything because you're a universe of one. We call it N1, right? In research, you're the research of one. So when you're doing your research, and your children need to learn that we can have good advice for them, but they need to find out what works for them, what makes them feel healthy. But they also first need to know what is health. What is healthy? Healthy isn't just the absence of disease. Health is thriving and being a supported part of our reality, right? I mean, they've proven so many times that if you're of service to other people, you're actually feeding yourself. So when somebody says, why did these people have all this money, want to have these foundations and serve humanity? Because they're getting a payoff, but it's getting a payoff in neurological health and physiological health because they're not separated, they're together. So I think our children need to learn that they're not a nuisance, they're not unnecessary. Every person, I mean, there's somebody out there right now that has a child that's going to figure out something that's going to change the world. It could be your child, but if you don't give them the environment to learn and grow, you can't expect the plants to grow in a poor environment. So we need to create the environment for them that's nurturing, loving, but then give them the right materials and give them the ability, the capacity to think. Because I think we've lost that in our schools today. People are learning to memorize things, which is very different. Just because you're smart in school doesn't mean you're smart. We all know people that are, maybe they went to Harvard, who cares? They're dumb because they don't know how to operate in the real world. We need to teach people how, we have a world of right now 8 billion people, and if they put everybody in the world in the state of Texas, they could all live there. We're not overpopulated. We're underutilized. So think in terms of utilization, and that's the same with the brain. It's about the brain and utilization.
Well, I know that everybody that's listening and watching this has got to be just as excited as I am because, like always, you're so full of information, but more importantly, things that we can actually put into practice. So thank you, Dr. Porter, for being with us. For those of you that are listening, I just want you to know, I will put here the link where you can actually get BrainTap for yourself, for your family, for your employees. I can tell you I have done that, and it's been one of the best investments that I have made because this technology has not only won awards all over the world, more importantly, it's helping millions of people right now be able to reprogram their thoughts, and more importantly, be able to have the peace, the quiet, the abundance thinking, everything that we want, because it all starts right there in your brain, in your mind. And this is one thing that can actually help you be able to achieve that. So thank you so much for listening. I look forward to seeing you on the next one, and God bless you. Take care.
To learn more about Dr. Fabrizio Mancini's groundbreaking work, visit www.endingchronicdisease.com and join the movement. Together, we can end the silent epidemic of chronic disease and create a healthier, more vibrant world. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, be well and stay inspired.